Volta and welcome to the Talking Blarney podcast, where we review and dissect some of the best and worst movies and TV shows based on, in and around Ireland, to tell you if they are a good representation of Ireland or if you're being fed a load of Blarney. My name is Stuart McNamara and I'm here with my co-host, Robert Cross.
I prefer Rob as fine, Stu, but hello everyone out there in radio land or podcast land. What are we doing today, Stu?
So, today we're going to review a movie, Rob. So, the movie we're going to take a look at is Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which is a fantasy adventure story from Disney released in 1959. Darby O'Gill as he struggles with problems of the natural and supernatural variety. Set somewhere in the early 1900s, we see Darby attempting to get 3 wishes from the king of the leprechauns. Darby contends with the trickery of the leprechauns while also trying to provide for his daughter Katie and stop Michael McBride, played by Sean Connery, from replacing him as groundskeeper of a lord's estate. So, Rob, what did you think of this movie?
Well, Stu, I liked it, I suppose, is the main impression. It held up quite well for when I watched this as a child, I'd have to say. The effects don't look bad. I think the acting is quite good. And it's still scary in parts to a certain extent. So I think, yeah, very positive.
Yeah, for myself, to start off with, I wasn't expecting it to be a Disney film, because it has been quite some time since I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
But it is. So if anyone out there has Disney Plus, not a sponsor, you can watch it right on there.
Other streaming services exist.
Exactly. First off, I really wasn't expecting this movie to be as good as it was. I thought, we'll get a good one in that we can tear the piss out of. It's going to be funny. It's going to be just nonsense. But it was a surprisingly good movie.
Yeah, there's a certain kind of timeless thing to it. I think you could show this to kids today and it would still be as impactful as it was back in the 60s.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to the care that Disney used to put into a lot of their stuff. Fantastic movie. So I suppose we get straight into the stars of the movie. So you have Albert Sharp as Darby O'Gill. So what did you really think of Darby in this?
Well, I thought it was quite a good portrayal, like an old Irish fella. Like, you know, he even had the look of him that he'd be like a guy down the pub drinking the Guinness in the corner. He'd be telling a few tall tales, or even like a hint of maybe that grandfather you'd have that'd tell you a few stories at weddings, or like a drunken uncle or something. There's definitely a very Irish kind of older gentleman to him.
Oh, definitely. We've all met someone exactly like Darby O'Gill. One thing I wanted to point out, though, Darby's not exactly a common name in Ireland recently, is it?
I don't think I know any Darbys personally.
Now, I went onto Facebook to see if I could just type in the name Darby. It's more common as a surname.
Yes.
But funnily enough, the naming statistics on the internet for the US, the name Darby for a boy shot up right around 1960. So, surprise. But now it's more common as a girl's name.
Yeah, I suppose Darby would be kind of something you'd hear, like...
Yeah, it's clearly unisex at the very least.
Yeah.
But it was just, it was a surprising thing to hear that it just shot up. Like, apparently there was, like, no one called Darby, and then this movie came out, and then everyone was called Darby.
It's like you've got all the kids now running around called Daenerys and Harry Potter or something.
Fair point. Yeah, crazy shit they do now. So I must say that the accent was spot on.
Well, I mean, he is Irish.
Yeah,
but it was definitely the right accent. It wasn't really one that you could strictly place, I think, to a particular part of Ireland. I would have said broadly maybe the West.
Yeah, definitely a country, which is a term we'll have to...
Yeah, I would have said... if you forced me, I would have said Tipperary somewhere.
But Kerry.
I kind of get that. I kind of get a bit of Kerry, but I thought there was definitely kind of it wasn't stereotypical. He is Irish, I mean, the actor, of course, but it wasn't too stereotypical. He wasn't being too kind of an accent. Yeah. So I think it was just the right level where, you know, we're watching it saying, yeah, he's Irish. It was a very good accent, and the Americans wouldn't struggle to understand him, but at the same time, it wasn't overdoing it. So I think he did that perfect.
Yeah. So the next character we have is Katie O'Gill, played by Jeanette Monroe. What did you think of her performance?
Good. No, I think as well. I think all performances are pretty strong in this film. We'll get to one in a bit. But I thought she played the character quite well. I think she was an English actress, isn't she?
Yes.
Or what was. I think she's passed away. Yeah, no, I think she did an okay Irish accent. I wouldn't really be able to place hers. It's a bit more nuanced, but I maybe set a bit of the South Dublin there somewhere. But no, I think she did quite a good job in acting, and I think not going to, you know, weak female kind of lead almost, or, you know, too much the damsel in distress. But I think it wasn't overdone.
I don't think she really plays a damsel in distress. I mean, you know, she's clearly taking complete control with the Michael McBride situation, where she's the one kind of pushing him to to get together in that sense. So definitely the hot and cold Irish lass that you still get nowadays. So it's nice to know that nothing has changed with Irish women in 100 years.
There was something I think I actually did realise when I was rewatching a couple of clips. There's an Irish song, and I can't remember the name of the song, but I know it, and it goes, "Johnny, get up from the fire, get up, sent it in the cold. See, it's Mr. Maguire." But I was thinking, is it Mr. McBride? There's another version of it, and he's trying to court your sister Kate. So I just thought maybe that was where the names came from that song, but maybe
possibly
not. But it was just something that kind of struck in my head there when I was rewatching it. So.
Yeah. But Kitty's a very good character. I mean, her big role there is being kind of the caring daughter to Darby, considering that her mother's passed away, which wouldn't have been that uncommon back in Ireland in those times. And so she plays that kind of almost motherly daughter very well.
It's a kind of a trope you see in more modern films now in America, where like you get the child that's like very grown up. It's like, oh, Dad, you got to get your life together, even though like they're 7. It's like, oh, who's raising who kind of a thing. But I think this sort of does that a lot better, where it's not grating or too annoying. It's like she's has a motherly quality, I definitely think, as well. But at the same, like I kind of said earlier, she's not shown as being a weak female character. She's shown as being a strong enough female character. I think comes across quite well and quite likeable, I would have thought.
Definitely. So then we have the king of the leprechauns himself, Brian Connors. Played by Jimmy O'D.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm sorry when he
It's alright, Rob, we can cut this out.
Please. Yeah, I'm sure like when he was cast as the king of the leprechauns in a film called Darby O'Gill and Little People, he could have really gone to town in this, but I think he went more paddied it up more than Albert Serf did playing Darby, but I don't think he went off the cliff into like, you know, farce almost.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's a very fine line, but I think he did do a good job. I mean, because he's playing a leprechaun with the crown and the big ginger beard and red hair, so of course he's going to, you know, really ham it up a bit, but I didn't think it was so out of there that it took you out of the story a little bit. I think he did do a good job of it, and I think he was very endearing, I would have said. He was certainly a likeable character, and yeah, good job, I would have said.
Yeah, one thing that I actually thought when I was thinking back over it is that this might have been the impetus for the actual leprechaun wearing a little green suit with the chin strap beard and the hat, because I was looking around and I couldn't really find much of a leprechaun pre that in terms of the obvious look that we all know when someone says the word leprechaun. So it might have actually entirely been based off of Brian Connors from Darby O'Gill.
I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. I think it's definitely, if you think of a leprechaun in your head and then you looked at him in the film, you definitely say that's exactly right. So the tail wagging the dog kind of thing, which came first, but I think it's a good portrayal of what you would think a leprechaun is. Yeah, certainly. I think
he plays a great drunk. I don't know how an Irish man like that would ever know how to play a drunk, but he plays drunk quite well.
It's a skill we learn in school and college too.
Right. Then on to the most famous of all the cast members, Sean Connery as Michael McBride.
Yeah, I think we can't really talk about his performance without getting at the accent, which I would have said to do was an East Dublin accent. You know,
how East, Rob?
Well, you know, you go out there to probably up about Cabra, and you keep going east out to the Bay, and you keep going there until you see the Isle of Man, and keep going, and kind of start going north a bit, right to you hit about Glasgow, I would have thought. So that level of East Dublin. I don't think there was really any attempt at an Irish accent there.
Well, there was a twang. There was a twang. That was about as much as he can do. I mean, we all know Sean Connery. He doesn't do accents.
I think it's, if you contrast it with a much later film he did where he's playing an Irish character as well in The Untouchables, where he's playing an Irish cop, Detective Malone. You know, an Irish-American cop in Chicago. Yeah, he kind of does the same thing where it's basically just Sean Connery doing his accent, but trying to put in a bit of an Irish twang there. And it's interesting that his interpretation hasn't changed in about 30 years between these two films. But yeah, but I mean, it's a Sean Connery. You kind of know what you're getting at that point.
However, when we lampoon him for his accent, pretty good at singing. The songs that they had in that movie actually kind of got stuck in my head for a while afterwards.
It's surprisingly good, actually. I mean, I don't think you'd look at Sean Connery and think, this man is a great singer.
Yeah, he has some pipes on him.
I'd say he does a good job. I can't really think off the top of my head another film where he sings. He certainly doesn't sing as James Bond, to my knowledge. But no.
You don't remember the musical movie?
Oh, good. I heard this one is gold, and it's his favourite finger, yeah.
Oh, God. Don't give them ideas, Rob. I mean, it's kind of hard not to see him as Bond now, but at the time it would have been a lot easier considering this was the role that got him James Bond.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see a little bit of the charm in it, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely with Katie and some of the scenes in the pub as well. He's got that kind of James Bond kind of air about him, just the way maybe he kind of walks and kind of the charm he can just put on. You can definitely see how Dr. No coming out about 3 years later. It's not a million miles off in that evolution.
Yeah, so one scenario that I thought of during the week that I'd like to put to you is imagine the guy who's there looking for his James Bond and he sees Darby O'Gill and he fits the characters from James Bond into that movie.
Okay.
So obviously Michael McBride, James Bond.
Yeah.
Then we have Katie as clearly either Moneypenny or a Bond girl.
Okay.
Darby has to be Q.
Fair enough.
And then Pony Subaru would then have to be Dr. No or whatever generic villain.
Would Darby not be M, like giving him the mission, and then you could have the King of the Fairies the King of Leprechauns rather, as like Q, then giving him like, instead of a gadget, like a magical thing?
I suppose that makes sense. Yeah, so you can see how, like, weirdly, there is you could make...
Instead, it's just like when Darby gets into the coach, when after the Banshee comes, it could just be like, then it just starts, just like the DB5 and Goldfinger, where all the gadgets just start coming out. You have like a coach chase.
So if anyone listening wants to re-edit Darby O'Gill into a Bond movie, you have our full endorsement.
You probably have to ask Disney as well, I would imagine.
Fair use, Rob. It'll be fair use. I suppose then we'll go on to our highlights from the movie itself, because it had some great scenes in it, and there's really a lot to talk about here. What were some of your best scenes?
Well, I think the thing that stood out to me the most, definitely before I watched this again, the bit I remember most vividly from being a child is the Banshee scene, because that terrified me as a child. And it still it doesn't scare me as much now, but it still looks good. For a film that was made in 1959 with no CGI, it still looks good, and that would still terrify kids today. And I think maybe the reason why it scares me more is because it's like an Irish mythical creature that
we've all heard of
the Banshee, and the same thing where I live, there's supposed to be the Banshee in the field down the road. So watching that film and seeing a Banshee is like, oh, that terrifies me. And then we told, oh, there's a Banshee on the road, that's what it looks like and that's what it does. Like, well, I'm not sleeping tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an American, you're thousands of miles away from the nearest Banshee, but we're living right here, so we're a little closer.
Yeah, so that definitely is the thing that stuck to me, and even just I actually think it's like probably the highlight of the acting in the film was when Darby does go into the coach.
The coach to Bower, yeah.
Yeah, and you can really just see the emotion on his face. I think that is actually a very powerful scene.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's quite sad.
It is quite sad, but I think it's just very well done, and I think it. You got to just give props to Disney for doing something, ethnic, I suppose, as they would have said at the time. Yeah. Something outside of... and
having it go quite dark as well.
Yeah.
Considering Disney's usual fare of movies don't tend to get that sad and upsetting as seeing a man literally walking into a death coach.
Yeah, exactly. And it is definitely dark, like you said. I mean, but there are dark bits in Disney films from that time, even some like Snow White or Cinderella. There's Cinderella where the witch gets killed. His stepmother,
yes,
is pretty it's pretty brutal. But yeah, I don't think it goes too dark at the same time. This film is very good at treading the needle, walking a fine line. It never goes.
Yeah, it's still good for all ages.
Yeah,
really.
It never goes way too scary or way too paddywhackery. It always does things just
there are one or two things that I will point out later on.
Yes,
but for the most part, it did a good job.
I also did like the Sean Connery scenes where he's just in the pub. I think, kind of going to what you were saying earlier about him being James Bond cast from this, you can definitely see that the charm, like I was saying earlier, is there when he's dealing with Katie, but just he seems kind of at ease there.
Yeah, he's kind of in control of the situation.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to exactly say, but you kind of feel like you'd meet someone like him, like Darby and Michael. You'd meet someone like the two of them in a pub, and the kind of confident young fella who was very much, grand head on him, not a bother on him, and then Darby like telling all the tall tales. I think it gives a certain sense of realism to me. I think you can relate to it quite well.
Yeah, I think my favourite scene is probably the poutine drinking scene.
Of course,
which it's so beautiful. I mean, she's just there. The best part is the horse, which, if you didn't catch it, is named Cleopatra, which is the strangest name. I
didn't quite get that.
I think it's because it's Lord Fitzgerald's horse, so maybe he would have known who Cleopatra was, but I mean, not to disparage my own country, but I don't think anyone from the bowels of Kerry 100 years ago knew much about Egypt beyond it existed, even that. So
yeah, I don't really know, but maybe it's an in-joke.
Maybe it was just an odd moment, but in the Putchines scene, for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, although you should after this, Darby is trying to get Brian Connors, the King of the Leprechauns, drunk so that he'll stay with him until morning, and when it's morning, he won't be able to use his powers anymore and he won't be able to escape, so that Darby can then get his wishes. And so he brings down a big jug of Pusheen and he offers a glass to Brian Connors, who of course happily accepts the way any good Irish person would, and Darby, pretending to drink himself, pouring it all back into the jug, continues to get him drunk, while also they start a drinking song that is basically like almost a rhyming game between each other. It's not an actual song, you just kind of make up a rhyming sentence and then the other person has to kind of rhyme along with it.
Kind of like an early 8 Mile kind of rap diss track thing almost.
Yeah. Darby O'Gill, earliest rapper in history.
It's like top 10 rappers Eminem is afraid to diss. It is. I do know, as a poet, I do know a little bit about the evolution of Irish poetry, but there was a thing in Scotland in particular which was kind of like that. I think it was called flirting or flithing, where you'd basically meet up with another guy on top of a hill and you would basically do poetry at each other, insulting each other, until one of the other guys says, okay, you win, let's go get drunk. So I think there might be some inspiration from that into Irish culture, but that was the original kind of rap.
We kind of just skipped the whole poetry part and went right to the drinking part. So one of my other favourite parts was actually just the pub itself being kind of really central to meeting people, which is how it is in Ireland, especially in rural communities where you just have to go to the pub, everyone's there. I mean, even the priest comes in at one point.
Absolutely. And I think it's not to overstate it, but the pub is very much the centre of an Irish community, because unlike in a lot of places, it's not just a pub.
Yeah.
It's also like an undertaker's, funeral home,
post office,
a shop. The pub is literally the centre of the community because it's about 5 different things. So I think it isn't like a stereotype in Ireland to have a load of scenes set in the pub. That's just realistic. Yeah,
and I mean, there are some pubs which currently look quite similar to that pub. I mean, I would say Kilkee has 1 or 2 that are
Murphy's, I think, are the Greyhound down there for.
Yeah, they still have that really
sponsored.
They still have that really old aesthetic to them that looks quite like the pub in a movie from 59.
Yeah, I think some haven't changed since 59 too. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
Now, the big highlight of this movie, I think, is actually the special effects that they have, because for a movie that was made 50 odd years ago, they're fantastic. I mean, the forced perspective that they use for the leprechaun, they really look small in a similar way to like the Lord of the Rings made the hobbits look small, but like so long ago that it's almost unfathomable that they were able to be that clever.
I suppose it kind of just goes into it that you don't need to overcomplicate something by doing like CGI or anything. Like very simple practical effects can work. And I mean, like we were talking a bit about Bond earlier, the kind of comparisons here, that's what made the Bond films stand out even till today, because they do practical effects. They do like miniatures for like explosions and things like that, or like plane chases or whatever, and it still looks good because they know how to shoot it. And it's the same thing here. Something as simple as just doing a bit of different perspective, using a different camera lens, lighting, whatever, can make something be very effective. Like I think the Banshee was done with like double exposure on the film.
Yeah, I have a bit about that. I mean, it was really great. There's only one little bit that really brought it down, was the lantern. So there are certain scenes at night, and clearly they're filming it on a soundstage, so can't really have a fire. So what they have is they have Darby holding this lantern with maybe a little bulb in it, but it's not bright enough to actually see by. So I noticed that they have a spotlight pointing at the lantern and moving with him, kind of not well, but enough that if you're not paying attention and you're a child, you might not notice. But then at one point he actually leans through a door with the lantern, and it takes an extra couple of seconds for the spotlight to turn off, so it's obvious and it was funny. Didn't really take me out of it too much, but I thought it was just a hilarious kind of contrast to the great forced perspective and special effects they're doing there, and then they have a spotlight that they can't turn off in time. Yeah,
I didn't notice this at all when I rewatched this film until you pointed it out to me. And then I watched a few clips, and I was just like, "Oh, there it is."
Yeah. One scene cannot be unseen. I think
it's quite noticeable where he's running up to Katie when the Banshee is around. It just seems to be going all over the. I think because there's extra film, I noticed it quite a lot there.
Yeah. So the next big thing to talk about it then is this setting. This was set in a town in Kerry, and I think that the actual town itself looked great.
Yeah, I think it obviously this is like the early kind of 1900s-ish is kind of what we're talking about, but a lot of Irish towns would still have a certain core of them that would be those kind of old buildings. So
yeah, you have like the church there, the pub, the shop, post office. All of that would be there, and then I think there was like some kind of monument in the middle, a religious monument.
Yes,
and
not too out of the
I mean,
thing there.
The only things that would be different is you probably have a tarmac road and a spar.
Yeah, probably bookies as well.
Yeah, definitely, as they all need now. Even the shop I thought was very well done. There was also a post office as well, and then you had the elderly people, or the elderly woman, I should say, being a bit of a busybody, as you'd expect them to be, reading people's letters inside.
Yeah, I suppose. I think the setting definitely it felt like an Irish little village.
Definitely.
I think you can definitely go to some places down in Kerry now, or a lot of other parts of the country, and it wouldn't exactly be out of whack there at all.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was odd, though, and it might just be my own lack of knowledge, but obviously the leprechauns live in a dilapidated castle on the hill or mountain Knocknashiga, which doesn't exist. But I don't know of any castles built on hills in Ireland. Not to the extent that they are in the movie.
Yeah, I think that's... I mean, you have the Hill of Tara, obviously, where the Vikings, but that wasn't really a castle. I mean, obviously, the main thing I thought of was really kind of Edinburgh Castle, where it was on the hill above the city. I couldn't really think of a proper Irish comparison.
Once again, we're going very North Dublin there.
So,
not really an Irish thing, but maybe there is, and maybe we're just incorrect about that. Who knows? Another big thing that is subtle, and a lot of people who aren't Irish might know about, is they discuss cutting turf.
Yeah.
Which I think we should explain to people if you want to.
Well, what turf is like peat, maybe people would call it.
Yeah.
You go down to like a bog, which is like an old pond that's had like loads of trees and dead things in it, and you cut turf out of it with a special kind of shovel. I can't remember the name of it. And yeah, it's kind of like a block of tobacco or something. It looks like.
Yes,
that is the best I can describe.
It's basically a block of mud, except it burns when you put it in a fire,
and it has a very strong distinctive smell.
Yeah.
If any people are fans of, Lagavulin whiskey or anything like that, they use peat, which is basically turf, to smoke it.
Yeah.
So that, if you ever smelled that kind of smoky Scotch smell, that's what it smells like.
So there's a lot of it here, and people still go out in the evenings or the days to cut turf. To burn over the winter. So it's still a common tradition, just for anyone who didn't know. Another great point is their use of the Irish language.
Yes.
Which I was surprised by, but was actually quite lovely to hear. Obviously for counting and that, and then opening the magical rock wall to their castle.
It's nice to hear it in film.
Yeah,
definitely.
And in that movie, it made it kind of a magical thing, which I thought was nice. Coming from Ireland, you're basically force-fed Irish from a young age, and you don't always appreciate it. But seeing it used in that way, where it has that magical quality to it, made it a little bit nicer.
I think it does sort of work, and I think with particularly the mythology in the film and everything else, having Irish is almost like a magical language of fairies and leprechauns and everything else does kind of lend to it quite well. I think it is a beautiful language, and I think it does work quite well in this kind of context.
Yeah, and the last bit there for
you also weren't bad at speaking the Irish, I will say. Comparatively speaking.
Pretty good job. One other thing that I found quite funny was they're referencing the Spanish Armada.
Yeah,
with the leprechauns have a cannon and I think it was some musical instrument as well.
Yes.
That they got from a Spanish Armada, which actually is a reference to something that did happen in Ireland.
It sure did.
Where in 1588, the Spanish Armada sank off the coast of Ireland during stormy weather. So just using our actual history to make this beautiful little story just kind of broadened.
Yeah, of course that was off Clare.
Yeah.
Outside the town of Spanish Point. Conveniently they named it, they sunk outside of Spanish Point.
Yeah, it's weird that it was called Spanish Point.
Yeah.
And then Spanish ships sank there. Don't know why.
Yeah.
Can't say.
Clearly, the Queen Elizabeth was having a bit of a laugh.
She knew something was coming. Then I suppose we should talk really about the folklore. The big one, obviously, is the leprechauns themselves, which I thought were pretty accurate to the legends. I mean, you get the prankster side, the tricksters, and obviously the big pot of gold, which is all you really want out of a leprechaun. What did you think yourself?
Yeah, I think because we kind of said earlier, it's the stereotypical kind of view of a leprechaun is the king. with the beard and everything else. And I think definitely, like, you think of a leprechaun as like a little trickster who's like speaks in rhymes almost, and is like trying to trick you out of something because they're little tricksters or something like that. And I think it comes across that way. They're not really necessarily evil. They're scheming, but they're kind of like chaotic.
They're in it for themselves.
Neutral,
They do what they want, and sometimes that might be bad for you. I mean, the one thing that a lot of media gets wrong now is that they're basically the same as every other fairy, except they're cobblers. They make shoes.
Yep.
And that's mostly down to their own love of dance. So clearly they're dancing so much that they need to rebuild their shoes. And so they do a lot of shoemaking.
Shoe building.
Have you ever built a shoe now? For the woman who lived in a shoe, you have to build that one, surely. You can't cobble that one together.
It's like the four Yorkshiremen sketch used to live in a shoe in the middle of the road.
Yeah, so they grant wishes, kind of like a genie, where they can grant you the wish and screw you over. And I actually found a little story about it, where a man was out cutting turf. Mm-hmm. He caught a leprechaun, and he wished for a crock of gold. And so the leprechaun materialised the crock of gold, but it was stuck in the ground. So there was a tree next to him, he was kind of in a wooded area, and so the leprechaun disappeared off anyway. And so your man decided that he was going to tie his red scarf around the tree because the crock of gold was too heavy for him to lift. So he'd put a little marker there. He'd run home, get a shovel, and another friend come back and take it out. And when he came back, every tree in the forest had a red scarf wrapped around it. So he had no idea where the crock of gold was. And that's the kind of trickery that Leprechaun tends to get up to. The next one then is the Banshee, which, as you said, you had a real fear of.
Vividly. I think it's certainly a strong thing in Irish folklore. Like, as I was saying earlier, it's like, oh, there's one in the field down the road. And you would kind of get that across the country, where there's like banshees all over the spot. There's even my favourite story is there's a tree on the road between Limerick and Galway on the motorway, and they had to bend the motorway around the tree because it was a fairy tree and there was a banshee living in it.
Oh, right. I didn't know it was a banshee specifically. Yeah, I mean, they do it very well. I mean, a banshee is there to warn the living of their coming death and prepare them. So she's not really there to murder anyone herself. She just kind of warns that the Coach de Bower is actually coming.
The banshee is the sign of it.
It's very accurate that they had the comb, which is something that's common in the narrative of the banshees. And then there tended to be ghosts of women who died in terrible circumstances or who did terrible things in their lives. So they're kind of cursed to become a banshee in that sense, warning other people of their coming doom. After that then we have Puka, which actually is a shape-shifting trickster. So it takes the form of the horse Cleopatra, don't know why it's called Cleopatra still, and tricks Darby O'Gill, knocking him into the leprechaun's kingdom.
I thought it was interesting because it's like one of the kind of creatures in our mythology you don't see as much, and particularly because I always thought Puka meant ghost in Irish. I didn't really think it was a shapeshifter, but it's good to kind of see lesser known things in our mythology on screen like that, because it is a lot richer than people realise. It's not just leprechauns and banshees and like men speaking in verse. There's a lot more to it. Kind
of part of the problem with the Puka is that they don't have a set form. They are always changing their shape, and there isn't a lot of information on them that I could find anyway. So it's harder to write it into a narrative with so little to go on. The last thing then is the Coach de Bower, or the Coach de Bower, which is the death coach that comes to take first Katie, then Darby, then eventually Brian Connors to the afterlife. That was done really well. Another thing that I didn't really know about until I had to look it up for this. I hadn't heard much, but it's a very important thing in old Irish folklore. So it was really good to see another thing that people nowadays don't know about being brought into it.
Yeah, I thought it was, I think, as I said earlier, it was quite a powerful scene, seeing Darby in there kind of crying, looking out at his house going away with the rain coming down. But yeah, I mean, I've heard about this, obviously, growing up. It's like if you go on the road, you get hit by a van, the coach will come and take you away.
Yeah.
kind of a thing like that, so you get killed playing on the road.
Right. Then we get into some trivia. I think one of the things that really stood to the movie is that Disney spent Walt Disney himself, I should say, spent 3 months studying folklore for the movie. A lot of it with Ashanachie, which is an Irish storyteller, kind of keeper of the old stories.
Oral tradition, I think you could say.
And so,
fun as it sounds.
That really comes through in the movie in how well it's done and how much care was brought in to making everything work really well.
You could definitely half-arse it, and they didn't. That's what I'd say. They, even like including things like the Puka and the Coach de Bower. Yeah, it's good. I mean, they obviously looked into this and put it into a decent structure when they were making it. There is care and intention here, and I think it did seem like it was a Disney passion project.
To go along with that, to give the illusion that the leprechauns were real, they weren't actually given a screen credit as leprechauns in the movie.
Okay.
If you watch the credits at the end. So at the start there is the title screen that says thank you to Brian Connors and the Leprechauns for being in the movie. And at the end, they're not called Leprechauns. So you have Jimmy O'Dea or whoever.
Yeah, as the king.
They're credited, but they're not credited as Brian Connors. So they're in the movie, but they're not, to give the illusion
that they're really Leprechauns.
Okay. And actually, to go on with that, they made an episode of The Magical World of Disney where Walt Disney actually travels to Ireland, meets up with Darby O'Gill.
Okay.
Darby brings him to Brian Connors, and Walt Disney asks him to be in the movie in an episode for television. That's how.
Wow.
Much he wanted to make this illusion that the leprechauns were real.
I thought you were going to say, and then you see Walt Disney himself personally catching the leprechaun in a big net.
That would be something else, but unfortunately not for this one. But
it's a shame you just didn't know the Leprechaun Museum is in Dublin now. That would have saved him a lot of time.
Oh yeah, definitely. Great museum there. So on a bit of a sadder note on trivia, Sean Connery is the only living member of the cast.
Yeah, who'd have thought? Well, I mean, Darby was not exactly a young man.
A lot of the people in it were kind of old, but it's still kind of sad to know that he's the only one left.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be looking at a sequel soon with the original cast.
I had that idea, actually. I was going to bring it up at the end, but now that you've mentioned it.
Oh, no.
Since Disney are kind of in the remake sequel mode at the minute, what if they did either a sequel to Darby O'Gill or a remake with Sean Connery as Darby? Or as Michael McBride, if it was a sequel, but old.
Have like the Sean Connery effectively playing the Darby role, but reprising Michael.
Yeah, if it was a remake, it would still be Darby, but if it was a sequel...
I don't think he acts anymore, but if you could give him a boatload of money, he'd probably do it. But
yeah, it's Disney. They just bring a truck to his house, like, do you want a second truck of money?
Truck and dump truck. Money up to my house. I'm that made of stone. I think if you got the casting right, I would have thought you would want Irish actors. You could do like Michael Fassbender's Irish. You could have him doing it.
True.
I think there's some good people to do it.
It would be nice to have Sean Connery reprising a role. But, if it was a sequel and Michael kind of grew up to become a very Darby-esque character, still telling the stories of the leprechauns, and I mean, with what they have with technology now, you could make a really convincing Brian Connors without Jimmy O'Dea being alive to do it.
I actually just thought of something. You could totally have like Pierce Brosnan just play like Michael's son, and just as like a subtle little, as a subtle little nod and a wink to James Bond.
That's something, I suppose. I don't know.
Pierce Brosnan is an Irish actor. I think he's from Navan.
I suppose it could work. Yeah. The last bit of trivia then is the director. Did you get a chance to catch who the director was?
No.
The director for this is Robert Stevenson.
Robert Louis Stevenson.
No, not Robert Louis Stevenson. So Robert Stevenson also directed Mary Poppins.
Oh, you can kind of see there's a similar kind of vibe to
there's something fantastic in both of those movies, and it's clearly that director who knows what he's doing, mixed with Walt Disney being a crazy person who does a lot of work.
Yeah, I think you can definitely see he kind of carried that benevolent kind of magical person into... Yeah,
he knows what he's doing with that kind of that mystical element, but it's not overpowered magic.
I will say, I think, you can say Sean Connery's accent is bad in this film, but compared to Dick Van Dyke's Cockney accent in Poppins, that's, he give Connery the Oscar, quite frankly.
Right, so then I suppose we'll give our ratings for the movie as a whole. So Rob, is it a crock of gold or a crock of shite?
I would say crock of gold. It was a terribly enjoyable film. It's held up very well. It still evokes strong memories of one particular scene. The acting is pretty much good all around. I would say overall, it's a happy film.
Yeah,
I guess towards the end. I liked it. Yeah, what more can I say? Watch this film. It's a fantastic, fantastic Disney film.
Definitely. I would also give it a crock of gold with the caveat that there might be one chocolate shitty coin in there, being that when Darby actually gets the chance to make his 3 wishes, one of them is for a good crop of potatoes, which is about the one really big bit of paddywhackery I could find in the movie.
I think I'm willing to let that fly, because if he was living down in that kind of part of Kerry at that time, he definitely would have heard the stories of the famine from his parents, or not have seen them when he was very young. So I'm willing to kind of give him a pass on that one.
Yeah, it's just the idea that he's wishing for a crock of gold, and then also a crop of potatoes, when the crock of gold could probably buy every potato in Ireland.
Yes, money can be exchanged for goods and services.
So it's just a very odd thing for them to put in when they were so well on everything else. But I suppose, what can you do?
Yeah.
So then I suppose if anyone else out there listening has their own review of the movie for us and their own rating, they can send it in to us. We actually have an email address, which I'll give at the end of the show, and a Twitter. So that's exciting. I guess that's the end of the show.
It sure is. Thanks for joining us on our little quest here. I'm sure we'll be back with something even greater. I mean, because it's not like Disney would make a new film recently involving Ireland. I'm sure if they did, it must be fantastic.
Oh, yeah. They do a lot of good stuff for us nowadays. If you'd like to review the show on your podcast app of choice, go right ahead. If there's some kind of subscription that you can do for us as well, tell a friend, and you can contact us at Twitter at TalkingBlarneyPod, and email is talkingblarneypod@gmail.com.
And we're very up for suggestions for any media you'd like.
Yeah, send us in anything.
Film, TV, probably, I don't know, comic books.
And that's goodbye for me.
And goodbye for me.
Bye.